The air crackled with a static chill, not unlike the faint, decaying police audio from 1960. It was the sound of something ending, violently, unexpectedly, within the hushed embrace of Lake Bodom's ancient forests. The tape, held back for decades, whispered of a serene campsite shattered, of youthful dreams dissolving into a nightmare. We heard the frantic, fragmented reports, the disbelieving voices describing a tent, once a sanctuary, now slashed open, raw and exposed to the cold Finnish night. Crime scene photos, equally suppressed, painted a bleak tableau. Blood, stark against the canvas, confirmed the brutal timeline. A quiet evening descending into chaos. Reports of a dark figure, vague and unsettling, emerged from the surrounding darkness, only to be dismissed by shifting official narratives. The lone survivor's account felt fractured, incomplete, a memory severed by trauma or something far more deliberate. Local suspects, shadowy figures themselves, displayed bizarre behaviors, their words laced with unspoken knowledge. Documents, buried deep in archives, hinted at cult gatherings or an older, darker power residing in the land. This wasn't an isolated incident. Lake Bodom's tragedy echoed in the disappearances that followed, threads connecting to an unseen presence in those same woods. We have to ask if a killer walked free, or if something else still walks there. And before we dive deeper, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. These mysteries aren't random, and if this video found you, it was meant to. Now let's begin. The file opens on June 5, 1960, a date now etched into Finnish consciousness, but for all the wrong reasons. 4 teenagers, 2 couples, sought a peaceful escape by Lake Bodom. They found anything but. Their cries cut through the pre-dawn silence, leaving behind a scene of unspeakable horror that defied easy explanation. Official accounts quickly became obscured, muddied by conflicting witness statements and an investigation that seemed designed to fail. The initial police response was slow, almost hesitant, as if the local authorities grappled with a phenomenon entirely beyond their understanding. The very stillness of the forest seemed to swallow facts whole. What was found defied simple logic. 3 of the teenagers were dead, brutally murdered, while one, Niels Gustafsson, lay severely injured, clutching a narrative that would shift and blur over the next 6 decades. This wasn't a random act of violence. It felt personal, almost ritualistic in its intensity. The fear that rippled through Finland was not of a common criminal, but of something far more primal and deeply disturbing. This wasn't just a crime, it was an incision into the national psyche, leaving wounds that never truly healed. The evidence, or lack thereof, would haunt this case for generations, and it forces us to look closer at the heart of the crime, the tent itself. The horror of Lake Bodom truly begins with the tent, a flimsy barrier against the coming darkness. It wasn't merely cut, it was meticulously slashed, an act of calculated penetration from the outside. This detail immediately complicated any simple theory of an internal struggle or accident. Someone, or something, gained access with chilling precision. Inside, the scene was a tableau of interrupted sleep and brutal awakening. Sleeping bags lay disturbed, some with stains consistent with a violent struggle. A pillow, soaked in blood, spoke volumes of the suddenness and ferocity of the attack. It was a space violated, ripped open to the elements and to a terror that no canvas could repel. But here's where the narrative fractures. The victims were attacked outside the tent. If the attack occurred outside, why the precise incisions? Why the deliberate destruction of their shelter? This didn't align with a spontaneous act of violence. It suggested a deliberate staging, an intent to create a specific kind of terror. The tent itself became a silent witness, its torn fabric a testament to a truth that authorities struggled to articulate. It was a detail too precise to be random, too deliberate to ignore, hinting at a presence that understood how to instill fear. And this brings us to the lone survivor, whose memory of that night became as elusive as the killer. Niels Gustafsson, the sole survivor, presented a story riddled with gaps and inconsistencies, a fragile thread in a tapestry of horror. He suffered fractured facial bones, a concussion, and stab wounds, yet claimed to remember almost nothing of the attack itself. His amnesia was profound, a medical mystery in itself, leaving investigators without a clear narrative. His statements over the years were not a single, coherent testimony, but a series of shifting recollections, each new detail adding another layer of confusion. He spoke of an attacker, then of seeing nothing. He vaguely remembered fleeing but couldn't recall who or what he fled from. Was this the natural response to extreme trauma, or something more? The local community often viewed him with a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. Some wondered if his injuries were self-inflicted in a desperate struggle, others if he was shielding someone, or perhaps something. The absence of a clear, stable narrative from the one person who lived through the nightmare left an unfillable void in the investigation. This wasn't just a case of fragmented memory. It became a core enigma, a psychological puzzle at the heart of the Bodom murders. His survival raised more questions than it answered, making us wonder whether he genuinely couldn't recall or if his memory was deliberately severed. And the chilling possibility of an unseen observer at the lake's edge only deepened the mystery around Gustafsson. The shoreline of Lake Bodom, usually a place of tranquil beauty, became a threshold for terror, where strange figures were reportedly seen watching. Several locals, some coming forward years later, described seeing a dark figure, or multiple figures, lurking near the periphery of the campsite on the night of the murders. These were not casual hikers. One farmer reported seeing a man walking away from the lake, his clothes appearing disheveled, shortly after the estimated time of the attack. His description was vague, yet unnerving, suggesting a deliberate attempt to avoid notice. This account conflicted directly with the official narrative of a singular, sudden assault. Another witness, a mushroom picker, spoke of seeing a boat leaving the shore stealthily in the pre-dawn hours, its occupants obscured by mist. This detail was dismissed by investigators, but it lingered in local whispers, suggesting a planned escape route. The lake itself seemed to conceal as much as it revealed. These eyewitness accounts, fragmented and often discounted, created a persistent counter-narrative, suggesting multiple actors or a more complex scenario than authorities were willing to admit. They painted a picture of not just an attacker, but an unseen presence, a dark force observing the unfolding tragedy. This divergence between local observations and official statements only fueled public anxiety. The horror of Lake Bodom quickly spiraled into widespread public panic, a fear amplified by the cryptic nature of the crime and the perceived ineptitude of the investigation. The newspapers, initially restrained, soon published sensational accounts, each more terrifying than the last, leading to a chilling speculation that a monster lurked in the Finnish wilderness. Authorities, caught between public outcry and their own lack of answers, seemed intent on damage control rather than transparent disclosure. Statements from the police were often vague, contradictory, and designed to quell fear rather than present facts. This approach only deepened suspicion and fueled wilder theories among the populace. The press, initially vital in raising awareness, eventually contributed to the suppression of inconvenient facts. Details that didn't fit the emerging, albeit shaky, official narrative were downplayed, or simply not reported. The narrative became less about objective truth and more about managing public perception in the face of an incomprehensible tragedy. This suppression created a vacuum, filled by rumor and whispered accounts, cementing the idea that the full truth was being deliberately withheld. The public wondered if they were being protected from a madman or from something far more sinister that authorities couldn't or wouldn't explain. This climate of fear and secrecy naturally drew suspicion towards anyone who seemed out of place. Among the shadows cast by the Bodom murders emerged a series of unnamed suspects, locals whose eccentricities or past behaviors became targets for public and unofficial scrutiny. These were not established criminals but peripheral figures, often dismissed by official investigations, yet haunting the collective memory of the community. Carl Valdemar Gillstrom, an innkeeper known for his intense dislike of campers, became a prime suspect in local folklore. He reportedly confessed to the murders while intoxicated, claiming to have done it just for fun. He committed suicide by drowning in Lake Bodom years later, adding an eerie resonance to his purported confession. His wife, however, insisted he was home that night. Another figure was the local shepherd, an older man seen around the lake, known for erratic behavior and a history of violence. His presence near the campsite, though never directly linked, fed into the pervasive fear. He disappeared shortly after the murders, only to resurface years later, still an unsettling, unexplained element in the narrative. These individuals, by turns suspicious and pitiable, created a mosaic of potential culprits, never fully investigated, never fully cleared. They added to the sense that the true perpetrator walked freely among them, an invisible menace. The official investigations, however, veered towards different conclusions, often ignoring these local whispers. Decades later, the Bodom case was dramatically reopened, not with new evidence from the original tragedy, but with new forensic capabilities. This promised resolution, but instead, it merely rewrote parts of the established narrative, casting doubt on what was previously taken as fact. The process felt less like an investigation and more like a carefully managed trial designed to finally close the book. Niels Gustafsson, the sole survivor, was controversially arrested and charged with the murders in 2004, nearly 44 years after the crime. The prosecution's case relied heavily on modern DNA analysis, claiming bloodstains on his shoes were consistent with him being the perpetrator, not just a victim. This was a direct inversion of decades of unspoken assumption. However, the trial quickly became a battle of experts, challenging the interpretation of the new evidence against old, conflicting testimonies. Defense lawyers argued that the DNA evidence could also place Gustafsson as a victim reacting to an attack, not initiating one. They highlighted logical inconsistencies in the prosecution's timeline. Gustafsson was ultimately acquitted of all charges in 2005. The reopening of the case, while offering a modern perspective, only succeeded in muddying the waters further. The acquittal left the killings officially unsolved, highlighting the persistent gaps in the original investigation and cementing the feeling that the state was grasping at straws. The central piece of evidence, the blood, still presented a baffling pattern. The blood pattern at the Bodom campsite was not a chaotic splatter, but an unsettling tableau, almost geometric in its distribution, defying simple explanations of a wild, desperate struggle. Analysis revealed that most of the blood was found outside the tent, despite the victims having been in their sleeping bags inside. This spatial disconnect proved crucial. Forensic experts, some analyzing the original scene photographs years later, noted that the distribution implied a deliberate arrangement or a specific sequence of events that was never fully accounted for. It wasn't just a matter of blood having been outside. It was the specific locations and concentrations that raised questions. There were pools and trails that suggested bodies being moved or a struggle that played out across specific areas, rather than a confined, chaotic attack. The very neatness of some of the patterns, juxtaposed with the brutality of the act, felt designed, almost planned. It was as if violence had been orchestrated with a cold, detached precision. This eerie geometry of the blood, more artful than accidental, forced investigators to reconsider the narrative of a spontaneous act. It hinted at a perpetrator with a methodical mind, an understanding of the scene, or perhaps a detachment from the human chaos he had wrought. And then there were the deeply unsettling distortions within the forest itself. Beyond the physical evidence, the Bodom narrative is riddled with accounts of distortion in the forest, lost time, strange sounds, and an unsettling sense of disorientation reported by those in the vicinity. Rescuers and early investigators often spoke of an inexplicable quiet, a stillness that felt unnatural, almost oppressive, in the woods surrounding the lake. Some searchers reported feeling a profound sense of confusion, losing their bearings in seemingly familiar terrain. Hikers near the lake in the days following the murders reported hearing disembodied whispers, faint cries, or rustling in the undergrowth when nothing was there. The forest seemed to hold its breath, a silence that wasn't peaceful, but heavy with unseen presence. The concept of lost time surfaced in witness statements, not just from the sole survivor, but from others who claimed to have been in the area. Brief, unexplained gaps in memory, moments where the senses felt dulled or distorted, added a layer of profound unease. It was as if the very fabric of reality became porous around Lake Bodom. These phenomena, often dismissed as psychological responses to a tragedy, nevertheless contribute to the chilling pattern of inexplicable events surrounding the lake. They suggest that the forest itself was a witness, or perhaps an accomplice, in holding on to its secrets. And this brings us deeper into the historical echoes found in local lore. Lake Bodom and its surrounding forests are steeped in local lore, tales of ancient spirits and unsettling occurrences that predate the 1960 killings by centuries. Villagers spoke of the Necken, a water spirit said to lure people to their deaths in the lake's depths, or forest Hisi, mischievous entities that led travelers astray. These weren't just campfire stories. They were cultural warnings, passed down through generations, reflecting a deep respect and fear for the unseen forces believed to inhabit the wild. The forest was not merely trees and earth. It was alive with something ancient, something demanding reverence. Whispers of cursed ground or thinning veils around Lake Bodom persisted, long before the teenagers met their fate. Locals often avoided camping near certain shores, citing an inexplicable dread or accounts of strange lights and disembodied voices on moonless nights. They instinctively understood a primal danger that went beyond human malice. The Bodom murders, therefore, didn't create the unease. They merely confirmed an ancient, unspoken truth that the land itself held a malevolent energy. What happened in 1960 felt like a violent manifestation of these age-old fears, deeply unsettling because it mirrored what the elders had always warned. This fear is magnified when we examine the recurring pattern. The true chilling nature of Lake Bodom extends far beyond that single horrific night in 1960, revealing a disturbing pattern of disappearances near its silent shores. Over the decades, other individuals, often campers or hikers, have vanished without a trace in the same general vicinity, their whereabouts remaining an enduring mystery. These aren't cases of people simply getting lost. Search parties meticulously combed the dense forests, but frequently came up empty, as if the land itself had absorbed them. Personal belongings were sometimes found precisely arranged or left untouched, echoing the eerie tidiness of the 1960 crime scene. What links these later disappearances, apart from geography, is the distinct lack of a definitive explanation. There are no signs of struggle, no clear leads, just an unnerving void where a person once was. Each unanswered disappearance adds to the accumulating weight of the inexplicable. This pattern of vanishings, recurring around the lake, suggests something far more profound than isolated incidents. It implies a repeating mechanism, an unseen force that claims victims with unsettling regularity. This naturally raises the question: are we dealing with a human killer or something far more esoteric? The recurring patterns around Lake Bodom, the inexplicable disappearances, the distorted reports, the cold precision of violence, lead us to confront the entity theory. This isn't about a flesh-and-blood killer, but about a localized, malevolent intelligence, an almost supernatural presence that preys on those who venture too close to its domain. Proponents of this theory point to the consistent elements: the sense of disorientation, the fragmented memories, the uncanny stillness that precedes and follows the incidents. They suggest a predatory consciousness that can manipulate perception, leaving victims vulnerable and observers confused. It hunts not with a knife, but with an erasure of reality. This entity, according to some indigenous folklore and speculative investigators, isn't necessarily a ghost or a demon in the traditional sense, but an ancient territorial force rooted in the land itself. It draws energy from fear and isolation, manifesting in ways that defy conventional human understanding. If this is true, then the 1960 murders weren't just a crime, they were a profound incident of this entity's activity, a dramatic demonstration of its power, not just to kill, but to obscure and terrorize. The lack of closure then becomes not a failure of investigation, but a testament to an intelligence beyond human capture. The case, despite all efforts, is far from closed. Despite the passing decades, the inquiries, and the sensational trials, the Lake Bodom case remains officially unsolved, a gaping wound in Finnish history. But the truth is, the case is not closed, not truly. You found this file for a reason, drawn in by the whisper of its unanswered questions, sensing that something lingers. The persistent mysteries, the shifting narratives, the unexplainable phenomena, they all combine to form a chilling tapestry that science alone cannot unravel. The file exists not just as a record of a past crime, but as a living testament to an ongoing threat, or an enduring presence, in those silent forests. Every unanswered question, every dismissed witness, every suppressed detail, feeds into the unnerving feeling that the true story is deliberately hidden, perhaps even by the entity itself. The case is a warning, a cold reminder that some wildernesses hold secrets too ancient and too powerful for human understanding. So, when you consider the shadows that fall over Lake Bodom, remember that the silence is not empty. It contains echoes, patterns, and perhaps a presence that still watches. You hold a piece of that truth now, a forbidden document from a world where not all mysteries are meant to be solved, only to be known. Make sure to subscribe for more videos and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. We'll see you in the next